Shove and Eat. I'm your host, Ryan Miranda, and today I'm speaking with the amazing Chef Amethyst. Today we're going to be speaking on the value of ethnic food versus Eurocentric food. And without further ado, so the question we ask ourselves today, is there an inherent bias, a subconscious, to paying more for some cultures' food versus paying less for what we consider in America to be ethnic food? What do you think we can do to combat the stereotype that some foods have to be cheaper than others? Mexican, Thai, Chinese. While French itself, much like the ones I just listed,
Right,
it's peasant food. The best French food, the best food
right,
in the world is all peasant food. So,
right.
why is it that French food or Spanish food or Portuguese food, we can charge a certain dollar for it. But for Mexican, Chinese, Thai, or any quote unquote ethnic food, we can't.
I think most of it, like you said, definitely just comes from that like inherent bias, right? Like I don't even think people necessarily notice, right, that they are maybe paying less for certain types of food or whatever, right? And then I think too, it's just like partly I think maybe American culture, right? Where we still kind of put especially like French or Eurocentric food like on this pedestal, which is funny because most people in America don't understand that food, right? like right. I'm just like I think about like when we talk about something like foie, right? Like most Americans don't know what it is, have never had it, but if they saw it on the menu, they automatically are like, okay, luxury, right? But if you were to like say I'm putting duck liver or something on a menu at like an ethnic restaurant, right? Just this is like, oh well, why should I have to pay more for it here? Right. So I think it's partly just like you said, like mostly I would say it's probably just that kind of inherent bias. But I think too, like we have this tendency to want to like fetishize this like exotic food or whatever, but not pay for what it's worth. But for some reason, we still put like I said, like French and Eurocentric food on this like on this pedestal, and it's not even the food that most people are like comfortable with or familiar with. Like 9 times out of 10, you're probably gonna go get you some Chinese food. You'll more likely you eat that probably like at least once a week or something that's like that kind of like influence. So like you know what that is, right? Like you know what General Tso's chicken is, but you don't want to have to pay for it. Um so I don't know. I think it's what were some of the responses you were getting?
So the responses we got were pretty interesting, but they fell in line with exactly what I thought they were going to be. Across the board, it didn't matter age, race, or sex. Every single person respond the exact same way. They would pay less for quote unquote ethnic food. How did I say this? So I phrased it that everything was appeared to be at the same level. It was a very simple question. How much would you pay for a 3-course meal of blank culture's food? And Southern, Mexican, Thai, and Chinese, everyone would pay less. While French, everyone except for 3 people would pay more. And for me, I find it funny because being someone who, like yourself, who is classically French trained, Mexican food or Chinese food, and I hate like to just generalize Chinese food because there's so many different regions, but we'll just say Chinese food, or Southeast Asian food or Southern food, is incredibly meticulous and takes it's very labor intensive. So that it was interesting, but it got the response that I thought it would get. Now my question for you is: so why will people pay more for Eurocentric food?
No idea. No idea. I don't I've like because I've questioned this, especially obviously with like Southern food, right? Like I've especially questioned it, but I haven't like so I guess the only logical thing for me is like, oh, this is just a part of our society now, right? Like a part of Western society, I should say, right? Very Western. But like I guess what kind of gets me more confused now about it is the fact that like we know these things, right? Like we know that like French food isn't necessarily, depending on what it is, right? It's not like we're talking about we got a couple $1,000s worth of black truffles from France or something. You know what I'm saying? Right. Not talking about that. We're just talking about like basic run of the mill, but like we know now that, you know, again, quote unquote, ethnic food is more flavorful or just as flavorful or takes just as many steps, is just as full of technique, right? And like, so we know this now. It's not like we're like even 10 years ago where, you know, any ex-French man, whatever, you know, any French man's name you want to insert there, like was a Michelin star, I'm sure, was like at the top of the ladder. Like we're not even there anymore. So I don't even understand why that's still a part of our culture. Like, because I don't see any French restaurants opening up. You know what I'm saying? Like,
No, exactly. While the classics are running strong, the restaurants have been around for decades, we're seeing more and more southern restaurants opening up, and barbecue restaurants and Viet restaurants, and all these other cultures' foods are opening up because that's what people want to eat. I mean, for a lot of people, it's still kind of new, but these are the foods that people want to eat. Okay, now guess how much each person, the average, would pay for a 3-course meal with French food.
I don't know. I'll say $100.
The average price for a 3-course meal of French was $120 across the board for everyone. And then in order from top down, it was Southern food for $70 for 3 courses.
Okay.
Thai was $60 for 3 courses. And Mexican sadly came in last with $50 for 3 courses.
That's surprising. It's wild because it's like you think about it, and it's like, again, this is not to like take away from like French food, right? Because obviously technique is there. Technique, everything is there, right? It clearly provides a great base for even if you are doing more, different varieties of food, right? Or different cuisines. French is still a great way to like have that basis. But like I think about it, and like especially like the certain dishes that you're bringing up, these are labor intensive dishes, right? Like making tortillas by hand is not something that is like, I mean, you can do it on a whim, right? But it's not necessarily like your tortillas are going to be great. Like you don't have like the firm down, you know?
Oh yeah, totally. I made my own tortillas once and they were terrible. Could not make them round to save my life, and the texture I just could never get it the way they're supposed to be.
But I think it speaks to like, again, like that bigger issue, right? Of like, okay, well, why isn't our labor valued, right? Because like, again, it's not to say that doing, I don't know, fucking duck confit is like not a labor. It is a labor, but it kind of is at the same time not a labor intensive thing because like you're just leaving the shit to cook. But
right, no, duck confit is very much a set it and forget it dish. Of course you have to sugar salt it overnight and whatnot, or for however many hours you do it, and then but after that you're just putting in oil and just letting it cook.
Right, but like, why is that okay to be like consider? Why is confit considered like this beautiful fucking French technique that's so great, but like if I want to smother some fucking chicken or something, you know what I mean? Or like if I'm like deep frying chicken, then like, oh my god, we can't do this. So if I want to use lard, like you can't use lard, but we can use we can use duck fat, right? Like,
duck fat is just fancy lard.
Yeah.
And I'll go as far as say is that properly fried chicken is a more technical dish than duck confit.
Absolutely. I mean, you could very easily fuck up duck confit. You can very easily do that, right?
Oh,
but like,
absolutely.
You will definitely probably fuck up fried chicken before you fuck up duck confit.
Now, on the subject of sauces, we have the mother sauces from French cuisine. But I was thinking about this just the other day, talking to one of my coworkers. why isn't mole considered to be like a mother sauce like just now? I know you have the mother sauces of the of French cuisine, but like why isn't mole held to the same level of esteem that any of the French sauces are?
Mole, like crazy.
Exactly, yeah. Like, mole has, 30 ingredients sometimes, and it takes hours and hours to develop that flavor, and yet it's still not held in the same regard as something as simple as a bechamel. So the question is, how do we bring these foods up to the same level in society as Eurocentric food? How do we get Southern food, Mexican food, Thai food to have the same level of prestige that French food has? That's really the question.
I don't know even where I mean, I guess like to kind of where do we go from here with it, I guess is more of like, I mean, one, obviously people are just gonna have to keep calling it out, right? Like that, because clearly the conversation needs to continue to be had. And it's like, how do you change millions of people's minds that their food is just as good? I don't even know, right? I guess besides like, for me, I guess, okay, let more of these people have their own businesses, be more adventurous, make this food more mainstream, right? Like make ingredients easy to find in Walmart, where the average person probably goes to grocery shop, right? Like,
It's funny that you say that, because making some of these foods more mainstream would definitely help, and it's happening quickly. Certain cultures are having like their renaissance when it comes to being the new in foods. Korean is having it over the course of the past couple of years. Filipino food had it, and making them mainstream to get more people to eat them on a regular basis and see them as something that is just as good, if not better, than Eurocentric food. What's really funny is, most of the people who answered the survey probably couldn't name more than two or three French dishes. It's if that.
can't even pronounce the names of the food half the time, you know?
And at one point, I took my grandmother to a French restaurant for her birthday. It was wanted to take her out to a nice spot, and the menu read farm to table at the bottom of the menu. And my grandmother read that, and she looks at me and she goes, "What do they mean farm to table?" And I explained to her what it meant, and she looked at me and laughed and said, "That's just called cooking." And I will never forget the fact that she looked at something, a catchphrase that most restaurants use today of farm to table, and thought, isn't that just how you cook?
I mean, I think too, like, it's really sad. It's really sad because like I also think about like, okay, so kind of going back to what your grandma was telling you, right? Like that there really is no such thing as like farm to table. It's just food. Because I 100% agree with that. Because I think of like when I talk to when I talk to people outside of who are from outside of areas like California, New York, big metropolitan areas, or people from like very, very deep southern or southwestern places, you think about it and it's like, I didn't grow up with like a lot of like prepackaged vegetables or whatever, right? And we didn't have money. So this wasn't like, oh, we're going to like the farmer's market and but like no, like you would have a dude come by on his truck who has produce or meat or whatever from, like and so like we ate really, really good high quality food. Like we weren't eating a bunch of processed overly processed stuff. And I think about that, like I think about like you've seen all the conversation I have around like rabbit, right? Like eating something like rabbit.
Oh, I
Like,
love rabbit. I grew up eating rabbit. It was very much a staple in my house growing up.
yeah, yeah. And you and like and I but I think of that sometimes and I think about like one, how normal that was for us to have, right? And not a lot of us still. A lot of people even, years ago stopped eating stuff like that, right? But like again, if you put that on a French menu, if you put it on not even a French menu necessarily, right? Just like a white owned restaurant that probably just looks a little modern, a little clean, kind of has that certain vibe to it. It's you're paying $40-$50 for one dish, right? And I'm like, but you hear the flack I get when I say, oh, I like eating rabbit, or I'll never eat that, I've never had that before, or I would never eat that. And I'm just like, okay, but you'll go to these restaurants and get a medallion. You know what I mean? A single piece of tiny little piece, right? And that you're paying like, and again, we understand as people in the restaurant industry, like, okay, I know that $50 plate is not just the cost of ingredients. I understand that goes into labor and everything else, right? But like, the average person doesn't know that, nor do they care. What they think that they feel like they are paying $50 for that one medallion of rabbit on their plate. But like, if I was to put that on a menu someplace and you saw my brown face trying to make this, unless it was under a more, fine dining French, type aesthetic, you wouldn't want to pay for that. You don't feel like that is the quality is as good. And it's like, I don't like, what can you do besides, like I said, like, keep trying to push people to be more open to that. But like, I don't know, like, do we go, it's like, do we go away with things like rating restaurants, or, do restaurants need to be more like visible, right? Like in their menu costing and sourcing and all these other things, right? I don't know, like, I don't know. I don't know. It's a really, really weird. I mean, I guess some of it has to do with like industrialization and like people moving out of rural areas into cities, right? And feeling like they have to pay more for whatever kind of quality, or maybe you have to pay more because you can't get fresh okra or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. But it is a really, really weird dynamic, especially like you said, to kind of go back to like, especially people of color towards their own food. But I think that kind of goes back to like, maybe a lot of people not even knowing their own traditions, or culinary traditions or culinary roots or anything like that, to see like they don't see value in it themselves. And I don't know, I guess the only way is like, do we open up like a fast food, well, but see, you can't even do that as a person of color. Like with ethnic cuisine, you can't like open up like a fast food place because it's already deemed unhealthy, right?
Yeah, it's funny to see people label ethnic cuisine as being unhealthy when the majority of these foods, the base for it is it's vegetable heavy, with the accompaniment of protein, while a lot of French cuisine and especially European cuisine and American cuisine is all protein with like a little side of veg and a ton of starch.
We don't talk about how, wait, it's crazy. Like, everyone talks about how unhealthy like Asian food is, right? Because of MSG. Now we know that's a lie. Everybody talks about how bad Southern food is because of fat and whatever else, deep frying. And I'm like, y'all don't know how much butter and cream is used in French food? Like, that's why I use so much butter now, just in anything. Like, too, for like, we shouldn't have to call it. Why can't it just be food? Right? Like, why does it have to have
Yes.
this other kind of like misnomer?
Well,
Like, why does it have to be this?
because we have to have labels on everything. Because we have to. That's how we have to. That's how everything. That's how it works, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
No, but yes, it's. Yeah, we're definitely in a weird. It's a weird situation of trying to even try not just the average person, but we're trying to convince the average Southerner that their food can be just as labor intensive. Like it's at the same level.
It really is.
There was. I will say this, that Chef's Table is doing a service to all of these cultures to show like, look, hey, this takes work. Like,
Yeah.
this is work. Or then even like now I haven't watched any of it yet, but Chef's Table Barbecue, same thing. It's
Yeah.
showing like, hey, see this. You want to talk about labor intensive, like
Yeah.
technique driven food. You don't just put something in a smoker and smoke it. It's not that simple. It is, but it's not.
Right.
You have to know. It's an art. You have to feel the fire. You know, you have to.
Yeah. Seriously. Yeah.
Uh, so, how do we continue pushing the conversation of your food, my food, is just as high class or can be valued monetarily as much as Eurocentric, mostly French.
Yeah. It's always like French or Scandinavian or, you know, yeah. 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 That one part of Europe in particular. I mean, I think again, visibility is going to have to be like the biggest game changer, right? Especially living in like the social media age and the age of things like Chef's Table, where it's like, look, all of these things are just as good as the next. Like nothing is necessarily better than this one particular thing, right? But like I think what kind of gets lost in that conversation is why it's important that ethnic cuisine is priced the same or priced similarly to like French or or can be considered like fine dining. Because when you think about it, like restaurants are the number one failing business, right? Like just in general. And
Yes,
then
they
you
are.
add in being a person of color, trying to throw in this different cuisine, and why it's so much more important for them than, let's say, just going to throw out Rene Redzepi, right? Like why it's so important for somebody who is from Thailand to be able to come and put their food on a plate and
Absolutely.
charge just as much as he is, right? Like because the opportunities aren't the same.
And that's what I love about Rene. What's one thing I love and appreciate Rene is that there's often where he fucking speaks out against that shit. Often.
Yeah.
You know, when they got World's Best Restaurant, I love, if you watch the video of it, he goes up there's like we had to go through everything with you people. They like he put that world on blast, and it's you have, and I mean that's part of it, which is that's where kind of like that's where that level of bias comes from, is that top tier world, the Lyon, France, the Scandinavian nations that control all of the big, companies that Michelin and whatnot, who value a very specific style of service and cuisine, which all comes from basically Lyon, France. And we're supposed to adhere to those things while we're in Mexico City, New Orleans, while I'm in Oakland, California. Like I'm supposed to live up to. It's like, no, fuck you. I'm from here. This is how we do it. This is our food. Why can't we value it as high as yours? Why shouldn't it be?
Yeah.
I mean, especially places like the South, that the South and like where I'm at right now in like the center of California, I can tell you where my tomatoes are coming from.
Right.
I can tell you where my meat came from, and it's not that far away.
Right.
Meanwhile, you have the rest of the country that are getting, like New York, getting Michelin stars left and right. Other countries like, you guys don't actually grow food like 2/3 of the year. All of your produce is coming from outside the areas, but still they're at the height because they adhere to that guideline right there, the tiny little box.
And unless you're and this is to say too, because like obviously there are people of color who are putting their cuisines, on the map and doing it in that certain way too. Where they're getting that kind of recognition, right? Like we've especially seen it probably, I'd say, like the last 5 years. But most of those same people are still classically French trained, are still doing their cuisines by French standards,
Yes.
right? Or like even like when I look at like when I watch stuff that has like chefs like in Japan, right? Like Japan definitely has its own culinary style, but like you still see like the brigade system in there, you know what I mean? So like even if you're not necessarily doing French cooking techniques, like you're still doing French style, right? Like you still have that influence in there. But like what I want to see is I want to be able to see somebody who can do their cuisine and do it the way that they have done it in their country or their, you know what I'm saying? Like for hundreds of thousands of years, like do it that way. Like I'll use African food for an example. I want to be able to know that there's somebody's auntie in the back, pounding fufu, and that they could put that on a plate and still get a Michelin star for it.
Oh yeah, I mean, fried, like the art of frying came from Africa. Because
Yeah.
we other countries like did not have the level like that kind of like the palm oils or the animal fats and stuff like that. And
Right.
it just wasn't a technique. So the question really
I don't know.
is the if you take the all the different cultures and the quality is the same,
Right.
the three courses, how do we get to the point where they are all valued the same? How do we get to the point where Mexican food, Thai food, Southern food, New Mexican food, like the American Southwest, that and thank God for like Bobby Flay making the American
Yeah.
Southwest a thing. People and
Yeah.
he laughs about it because people were just like, "You're an idiot. What the hell's American Southwest food? What's that?" It's like
Right.
it is a style all its own.
But again, it still had to be a white dude to do
It
that.
had to be a white guy who
Now, I'll say that like living out here, one thing I do see a lot more of, especially at the few fine dining restaurants that are around this area, there usually are people of color,
yeah.
right? But it's 9 times out of 10 it's a dude. So like that even kind of goes back into like even playing it more, right? Because like we know that women majority of the time have been the ones to either pass down these recipes, teach these recipes,
Yeah.
are the prep cooks or whatever. So like I think maybe that has something to do with why the pricing is different, right? Because like a woman's labor is still not seen
No.
equitably,
No.
right? So like that might have something to do with it too. Like so like yes, Bobby Flay, my like other secret arch nemesis in the back of my head. Like he definitely was able to put that food on the map, but it still had to be a white dude to do it, right? Like why can't it be somebody's chunky auntie back there doing it? Like you know
Yeah,
what I
no,
mean?
it's true. It's so true. Well, it also had to be a white guy from who was in New York.
Right.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, even shit. There's still today. You have people chefs who are in New York who still look down upon Michelin stars in California because we're California. And it's kind of be like, fuck
Right.
you. You buy our produce all year round. Like you're still getting half your shit from
Literally.
us, or
Yeah.
Illinois, or Iowa, or Nebraska. Like what? You get your
Yeah.
apples out of the Hudson Valley like what, a month, 2 months out of the year.
Right.
The rest of the year
Yeah.
it's a frozen tundra.
Basically. But like it's crazy because like I remember going to New York and seeing like the price of fish, even out here, right? But this is a landlocked state, so I already
Yeah.
knew seafood was gonna be stupid. But like going to New York and I'm like and of course like again like like okay, this is New York, this is a metropolitan city, this is the most expensive city to live in the world, so of course you're gonna pay more anyway, right? But like what you pay for trout in New York, I would never pay for that anyplace else.
No.
Like
Which is funny because
it's insane.
trout here is dirt cheap.
Yeah, it's literally the cheapest fish out here that you can get.
Yeah, I mean, we have trout everywhere in California, like everywhere. Even the really expensive, like the Mount Lassen trout. Well, really expensive everywhere else. Mount Lassen trout and the steelhead and all that stuff. The steelhead trout is only coming from a couple 100 miles away from where I'm standing right now. So
Right.
when I've looked at pricing from other states, I'm like, holy shit, you pay how much for what? Oh right, you're 1,000 miles from the closest real body
Yeah.
of water.
Yeah. It's insane.
And so I think you did definitely hit one part is like our racial and gender bias when it comes to cuisine pricing.
Yeah. Because you think about sourcing, you think about like what we're talking about now. Like, can someone in New York City get the same masa that they can get even in California, right?
No.
We're not even talking about the
Yeah.
masa you probably can get, the quality you can get in the quality and variety you can get like in some place like Mexico or something like that, right? Like so we know, but again, like we know as industry professionals, like that there are all these other things that come into play with it, right?
Oh, yeah.
But even then, a lot of it still just boils down to the isms, right? Like, and it's unfortunate, but
That is a part of our culture that we need to fix.
yeah, and that's a larger part of our culture. I think we can start doing it more in the restaurant industry
Absolutely.
itself, right? But like that's such a bigger issue globally. Like, but I guess we would have to be that kind of like change, because I kind of hear people talk about it often where it's like, well, why are chefs often like the kind of first people you go to in food? And it's like, well, because we work with food, we know
every
food,
day.
right? So chefs will have to be the ones, chefs and cooks and whoever else are people in the food industry are going to have to be the ones to kind of push those conversations further, right?
Yeah.
And like really actually make those like actual changes. Like, are you going to be willing to step down from your position so that, you know, Letitia can come and be your chef at this restaurant that you're doing food that's not even your food, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's another
You know,
issue.
and that's a whole nother podcast. That's an entire other like series of podcasts of some like Bobby Flay. Like I've met Bobby Flay, and I was on Beat Bobby Flay, and he like being interacting with him. He's a really great guy. He's a really good person, you know, and
Right.
he's actually quite a bit more humble one on one than the image of
That he
TV.
lets off.
Like when we're talking about, it, he's like, man, I just hope. He's like, I was like, how'd you do? He's like, I don't even want to talk about it.
Right.
I don't know. He's like, this is your family's. Like, I don't even know. Don't know. I was like, wow, you're not like, yeah, one. No, you were like, fuck,
Right.
I don't know how this went. But it takes, it takes a guy like that in our current culture to take something like American Southwest food, which still most people don't even know what the hell that even is, and elevate it to a point
Right.
of, oh, we can sell, you know, chili rellenos for, you know, $40 on a menu
Right.
in New York. It's how, you know, the next question is how do we get to the point where it's not
Right.
a clean cut white guy? How do we get away from that? How do we elevate the person who's actually cooking the food? And not taking anything away from Bobby Flay. He took a brand, he ran with it, and he fell in love with the food, and that's why he does it. He didn't do it for just because. He fell in love with the cuisine, which is admirable that
Right.
he did that. But how do we get the person who the grandma, the mom who's from the Yucatan, who's from, you know, Mexico City? How do we get that person? How do we get the little Portuguese grandma, the little black grandma, the little Spanish grandma? How do we get that to be valued as much as the average chef in America being valued doing the exact same food that they learned from said person?
And it's like we can't, it's like again, like we have things like Chef's Table or the quote unquote good guys, right? The good chefs who kind of like try to give their staff and those other people who aren't represented, they try to give them that spotlight, right? But it's like everybody can't be a Chef's Table.
No.
You know what I mean?
No,
Like
yeah.
everybody can't even get that. So like how on what is that smaller scale? What is that like? I guess for me, I'm thinking about like what's that day-to-day thing that people can be doing to do that, right? And it's like, okay, one, if you are a person of color and you have an ethnic style food business, then raise your prices, right?
Yeah.
That's one thing, and that's easy to say,
Because that's
but
that's
it's harder to
scary.
do.
What you just said is very scary. That's like, if I raise my
Yeah,
prices, I lose my goddamn business. We could
yeah,
close.
yeah.
No one's gonna pay
But it's that
$6 for a
it's that
taco type
knowing
of
your
thing.
worth.
Know your
No, yeah,
worth.
true, right? It's knowing your worth, right? And it's like I don't know. I guess maybe if it was me and I was to have my own restaurant, I'd be like, okay, you want to know why this plate costs this much? I'll break it down for you.
Yeah.
You can happily see it on my menu. This is how much goes towards labor. This is how much goes towards lights.
Yeah.
This is how much goes to me actually buying the food. You know what I'm saying? Like we could do that. We can play tit for tat.
We
But
can.
like I shouldn't have to do that.
Shouldn't have to. Why do I have to tell you? Why do I have to prove to you the value of this
Right.
compared to something else? Perceived value and value of a restaurant and why things cost. And also, I know people don't understand how little restaurants walk away with at the end of the day.
Yes.
Like
very, very thin
minute.
margins.
I was looking up like industries
If you get anything.
if you get anything. I was looking at restaurants and like breakdown of this is when they gave the tax breaks to fucking airlines versus restaurants and whatnot.
Right, right.
Looking at how much money we bring in versus how much profit and whatnot, restaurants are in the bottom bottom 5% of profit earning
Right.
companies in the country, while contributing more into taxes, payroll taxes, labor, all that stuff. We contribute more to society than the top 90%, but we take home so much less. So it is it part of our history? Is it? It's. I don't think it's as plain as simple and plain as just isms. I think it's more
Right, right.
ingrained into our society. That's definitely a basis for it. That's definitely
That's the
mixed in.
basis.
Just definitely
Right.
definitely the foundation of it all. But is it that simple is it that simple today, or is it a broader subject of food TV making certain foods look like they're worth more?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
He gets a ton of shit, but Guy Fieri, you know, the, who's an amazing humanitarian, an amazing person, who I love Triple D because it doesn't matter what you look
Right.
like, who you are. He's going where the good food is. There's a Puerto Rican episode where he's like they had to like drag him away from eating mofongo, which
Right.
most
Yeah.
Americans have never don't even know what the hell that is. But he's like, what
Right.
is wait what is it? He's like it's fried plantains that you pound and then you stuff it with shrimp and pork and then you put gravy over it. He's like, I'll take
What else do
7
you need?
to give me more, please. And he,
Right.
he's what's great about him, and I think more chefs need to be like him, is use your position to elevate other people who don't have the
Right.
same platform. One of the other questions I asked on the survey after how much would you pay was, which would you rather eat?
Right. Right.
And
And it's probably not the French food,
French
right?
was at the bottom. It went Mexican, Thai, Southern, French. It's like, but everyone's like Mexican food. Oh, well, I would rather eat Mexican food than French food.
Yeah. That's more familiar to us than French food is.
Then this is the mind-boggling part is you are willing to pay more for a food you don't want to eat
Right.
more than the food you would rather eat. Which that's the part where I'm like, that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
If it had come back with, I'd rather, if I was like, oh, you want to pay more for French food and you want to eat French food, that would make, okay, they go together. That makes sense. This was,
Right.
you're willing to pay more, but you don't want to eat it.
Yeah. It does the math doesn't math. And I guess with that it kind of goes back to, again, just not even knowing the value yourself, right? Like just not having the, and this is not that, I don't think it's necessarily the consumer's fault, right?
No,
Like,
no, it's rarely
again, I
the
think it speaks
consumer's
to that
fault.
bigger issue.
It's
Yeah,
on.
very rarely.
It's very
Because we
rarely.
know that there's people who know their food and they'll come in, right? We know the Yelpers, we know those guys, but like the average person just does not have the information that they do get put in front of them about these different cultures or their food
Yeah.
is not ever really a good thing, right? And
No.
I think someplace like, for example, California is a little bit unique, and this is not just obviously to speak to like all of California, but certain parts where it's like you really have that kind of like really mixing
Oh yeah.
of different cultures, right?
Yes.
So it's like Black people are comfortable with Thai food out there or with Mexican food out there because you grew up next to each other, right? But like in the South, we didn't have that, right? We didn't have the Thai restaurant, so like that's not familiar to me, right? Or I don't really, or that's like the unknown, but like we don't have that information presented to us in a way to where it's like, oh, okay, well, this is something I can go
It's
try and that I
foreign
like.
and ethnic.
It's foreign, right?
There are very few things I don't enjoy eating. There are things
Right,
I'd rather
right,
eat. Give me two choices. I'm going to choose one over the other. But there's very few things where I'm like, I don't eat that. It's a small list. And they're for usually specific reasons. But when I talk to people like, oh, I've never had that, I'm like, what do you mean you've never had,
Right.
you've never had Thai food? I love you've never had Thai food. There are three
Right.
restaurants within a mile of my house right now. They're great Thai.
Yeah.
Like it's like how have you? Oh, right. You're not from California. You're
Right.
not from very specific parts of California. I think that's a big part of it too, especially in our culture, is we look at French and people think of all of France as Paris.
Yeah.
Why can't we have the, you know, the taqueria
Right.
centered in the middle of all the best farmland, some of the best farmland on the planet? Why can't they be valued as much?
Right. I mean, because like I think of, well, I know we're probably about to wrap up, but like I think of like there's a restaurant out here called Los Poblanos, and it's been nominated for a James Beard Award like eight, probably at least 8 times, right? And I mean, fine dining, beautiful food, accessible,
Mm-hmm.
not like overly priced to where you can't get it, right? And very, very, very centered on like New Mexican and Southwestern cuisine. And I think, and like again, it kind of it keeps going back to like the isms are the root of it, right? Because I'm thinking like, yo, I mean, I went to this restaurant and I staged it, and I'm in here, and I'm like, this is like the craziest shit I've ever seen in my life. Just how the quality of everything. I mean, complete, almost complete farm to table, almost zero waste. You know what I mean? Like, literally should be the model for what restaurants look like. Almost everybody who works there is a person of color, just about. You know what I mean? Like, the chef is a brown person. Like, and these people have been nominated 8+ times for James Beard Award and can't win it because, but like, why? Like,
Why?
what is your actual reasoning? What is the real reasoning why he's not getting a James Beard Award, right? And like we know, like most chefs don't do it for the awards. Are
No.
there some that do it for the awards?
Yeah,
Absolutely,
well,
but
yeah.
most chefs aren't looking for that. But like when you start giving people their props, when you start, you know what I'm saying? Like if we were to give someone like that chef and his team the props that they deserve, give them those awards that they deserve. Like that's a start to letting people know like this food is just as good. Not consider, you know what I'm saying? Like why is a Degas not as good as a the dude who paints and sells his paintings on the side of.
After today's discussion, we've realized that we've come a long way, but we have a long way to go.
Yeah,
The
definitely.
conversation needs to continue happening, and we need to start. People need to start valuing themselves and their culture and their food as much. So
Right.
it seems like a lot more of us need to value ourselves as much as they value themselves. Well, it was wonderful speaking with you today on a very important subject to both of us.
Yeah, do it again.